Chapter 1: The 1988 Australia Bicentenary Gold Cup. Way back in the 1980s, when I was young, I worked for an airline. I am not going to give too many details about the job, but I worked for this airline and I had knowledge of flight routes and paths that I acquired while working for them. I was also a soccer aficionado. In 1988, there was a soccer tournament in Australia called Australia Bicentenary Gold Cup. It was a tournament to celebrate the 200th anniversary of Captain Arthur Phillip's settlement in Port Jackson. Two South American teams were invited for this tournament, Argentina and Brazil. By the way, I haven't said it yet, but I'm originally from Brazil, and as a native Brazilian, soccer was the most interesting sport for me. I knew everything about each player, each game, and each national or international tournament. Following all the news reports about our national soccer team and about this tournament, I was told that some members of the Brazilian soccer team would be at Sao Paulo International Airport and they would be departing from there to Rio, where they were going to meet the rest of the team. I ended up missing the opportunity of seeing some of the players at the airport in Sao Paulo, but later in the day when I asked my co-workers if the Brazilian national team had flown to Santiago, Chile, as my logical conclusion was when going to Australia from South America, I was told that the flight had gone from Rio to Los Angeles, LAX. I remember questioning it and talking to my friends at the airport. Los Angeles? But Australia is just a shot across the Pacific on the globe. Why LAX? I just had to accept that because in 1988 there was not much one could do to find information about flights and I didn't have a flat earth map like the Gleason's flat earth map that I could compare with the globe. I had never heard of a flat earth before. Besides, for me at that time there was nothing more interesting than soccer. Could the Brazilian national team have just taken a regular passenger flight? The picture below is from Boeing 747-400, which flew the route Rio-Los Angeles. Varig, an extinct Brazilian airline, was the official carrier of the Brazilian soccer team for some time, and they had a flight Sao Paulo, Rio, Los Angeles, and then on to Tokyo. Varig Flight 832/833. Could it have been that flight that carried the Brazilian team to Australia? Was it a chartered flight? Did it fly straight from Los Angeles to Sydney? I just couldn't find any information on that. Please compare this flat path on the globe and on the flat earth map on image 02 on the next page. Had I had a flat earth map back in 1988, as I do have one today, I would have understood clearly what went on back then. Even when comparing this flight on a Mercator projection, as in the picture below, this flight path still won't make sense on a globe. For the team, it would have made more sense to have flown to Santiago, Chile, and then from there flown directly to Sydney. As I thought before, a flight from South America towards Australia would be a straight shot across the Pacific Ocean. Why didn't they take that route? If they were flying on a regular passenger flight, Varig had two flights to Santiago, Chile. On the other hand, if the Brazilian team had flown chartered, they could have flown at any time either to Santiago, Chile or Buenos Aires, Argentina, and then on to Sydney, Australia. These were the questions on my mind back in 1988, when I had no knowledge of the true shape of the Earth. More questions about flights arose when China Airlines Flight 008 made an emergency landing in Anchorage, Alaska on October 7, 2015. This is the topic for the next chapter. Chapter 2: China Airlines Flight 008. As I was constantly searching for news about politics in 2015, I missed much of what was going on besides that subject. One thing that made the news in October of 2015 was the story of a woman who gave birth during a flight from Taiwan to Los Angeles, forcing the pilot to make an emergency landing in Alaska. Well, let's talk about the story first and then we will focus on the flight path. The woman, a Taiwanese national, apparently lied about being 36 weeks into her pregnancy. She declared at the check-in counter that she was 30 weeks into her pregnancy. Although there is no official prohibition from traveling at that stage of a pregnancy, there is a rule among the airlines that pregnant women should not travel if the woman is over 32 weeks pregnant. She did not present any documents from a doctor, declared she was under 32 weeks pregnant and she was allowed to fly. She boarded the plane alone towards Los Angeles LAX. No one knows for sure if that was her case, but there has been a Chinese black market that takes Chinese pregnant women to give birth in the United States, making the baby to be born having automatic US citizenship. It's called birth tourism. There are reports that some women pay as much as $35,000 to go to the United States to have their babies in US soil. There are several reports, articles, and news videos online of authorities raiding clinics and taking doctors and nurses into custody for being part in such a scheme. No one knows if this woman was one of those women who paid such an amount of money to have her baby born in US soil. Some passengers who were on the same flight and saw and even filmed the whole thing said that at some point the woman asked, "Are we in US airspace yet?" Upon landing in Anchorage, Alaska, Border Patrol agents entered the plane and checked the woman's passport. She was found guilty of lying about how far into her pregnancy she was when boarding the plane, and 2 days later she was deported back to Taiwan. The baby in fact received US citizenship and remained in the US since a judge decided that the plane was flying towards the US and thus the baby was meant to be born in the US. Reports said that the baby was later reunited with the mother in Taiwan. This is not the first time such a decision on citizenship of babies born during an international travel had been made favorable to the families. There are reports that even back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, babies born during long voyages through the high seas coming from Europe towards America were given automatic citizenship upon arrival on Ellis Island by immigration inspectors. Those babies were granted citizenship because of the intent of being born in America. Many people on board of China Airlines Flight 008 took pictures and made cell phone videos of the airborne birth and filled the internet with their footage. Below are some pictures of the flight attendants who helped the woman and a doctor who luckily was flying from Taiwan to LAX. After I had enough information about the origin of the flight and the people involved in it, and the reason why the pilot had to make an emergency landing in Anchorage, Alaska, I then took a look at the flight path and compared flights on a globe model versus a flat earth model and got my own conclusion. Although this emergency landing took place at around the same time the flat earth videos were popping out of my YouTube suggestion feed, I did not immediately connect the dots. Only after I did my own comparison and research that those things started making sense to me. Image 02 on the next page demonstrates the results of my research. As we see on the image provided by Google Maps on the prior page, the blue line shows the two cities, Taipei in Taiwan and Los Angeles, the US. The flight on the globe should have been somewhere above the Pacific Ocean, and then according to several news outlets, it was diverted north toward Anchorage, which would have taken the pilot as long to reach Anchorage as it would have taken him to reach LAX if he just kept the plane flying. Or the pilot could have just landed the plane in Hawaii, since common logic is that Hawaii is located between US mainland and Asia. Image 03 below demonstrates what was reported on the news as this event happened. A single internet search into China Airlines Flight 8 emergency landing will result in images like this one on the right, of an airplane flying over the Pacific Ocean, diverted to Alaska. The flight time between these two cities, according to an internet search, is between 12 to 13 hours. China Airlines stated that the flight took off from Taiwan at 11:50 p.m. on Wednesday Taipei time and was scheduled to arrive in the US at 12:35 p.m. Taipei time, which is 8:35 p.m. Wednesday Los Angeles time. That would have been a 12 hours and 45 minutes long flight. The emergency landing in Anchorage took place at 9:06 a.m. Taipei time. That's 3 hours and 29 minutes ahead of the scheduled arrival time in LAX and 9 hours and 16 minutes into the flight. That didn't make sense on a globe. It only showed evidence that the plane was already flying over Alaska when the pilot landed the plane. There was no diversion. The flight was not over the Pacific and nowhere near Hawaii. It was now all clear to me that China Airlines 008 could not have landed in Hawaii because Hawaii is not really in between Asia and the Americas as it is shown on the globe, and also demonstrated on television screens during flights and on the seat back screen in front of the passenger as the image on the next page taken during a flight from San Francisco to Tokyo shows. I realized then that we have been fooled into believing what they're constantly bombarding us with, images of a globe, and we see it in every flight we take. However, the reality is way different. As demonstrated above on the larger image and then on the smaller image, comparing the same flight path between San Francisco and Tokyo, on both the globe projection and on the flat Earth map, the aircraft flies nowhere near Hawaii. The image shown on the seat's back screen is only to persuade passengers to believe they are flying over the Pacific near Honolulu, Hawaii, when in fact the aircraft is flying over Alaska, closer to the polar jet stream, nowhere near Hawaii. That explained to me why China Airlines Flight 008 made an immediate stop just where they were 9 hours and 16 minutes into the flight, within 3 hours and 29 minutes of reaching Los Angeles. It would have been impossible for the pilot to have landed in Hawaii because Hawaii is not even between Los Angeles and Taiwan, or between Los Angeles and the Philippines, or between Los Angeles and Tokyo, or between Los Angeles and Singapore, or between Los Angeles and Indonesia, or between anywhere in Asia and South Asia. Hawaii is way off in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, as we see it on the Gleason's Flat Earth map, image 05 illustrated below. I realized that no flights coming from or going to Japan, China, Korea, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia or the Philippines can ever make an emergency landing in Hawaii because the Earth is not a globe, and thus flights going to or coming from these countries all fly over Alaska. The evidence was clear right before my eyes that the shape of the Earth is not what I had learned during my elementary school years, middle school years, high school years, and college years, and during my Masters of Science program years. Everything I had learned in school about the shape of the Earth was a big lie. Everything started making sense to me. It shed light on a 25-year-old question I had about that flight from Rio to Sydney making a stop in Los Angeles. Having a flat Earth map in my hands, besides being able to understand the strange path of the Brazilian soccer team flying north of the equator to Los Angeles just to fly back south of the equator to Sydney, I was able to understand facts in history that seemed to be confusing to me for so long. The Gleason's map helped me to understand how the Japanese war campaign developed in the Pacific, and it also made me understand a fact little known to many people. Many Americans have never heard of the Aleutian Islands and the Japanese invasion of the islands. The Japanese invaded the Aleutian Islands on June 3, 1942. Having had control over most of Asia and Southeast Asia, Japan then moved towards North America, trying to control that straight corridor that goes from the coast of California all the way to the Philippines, as we see on the Gleason's map. It's not curved as portrayed on the globe, having Hawaii in the middle. Billy Mitchell, US General, stated in 1935 that, "I believe that in the future whoever holds Alaska will hold the world. I think it is the most important strategic place in the world." Let's take a look at another map called 1945 Air Map of the World. We can see in this map how Alaska plays a big role in the corridor and why General Mitchell said whoever holds Alaska holds the world. This map has the distances from Tokyo to Petropavlovsky in Russia, and from there to Dutch Harbor in Alaska, and from Alaska to Los Angeles. It was a very strategic corridor during World War II, and not a forgotten corner on the globe, while having Hawaii in the middle. Although the note on the right top corner claims that this is a projection of a globe on a flat surface, it's quite the other way around, since the flat Earth map is over 1,000 years old, while the first globe was introduced in 1497. Here is a close-up of both maps compared side by side. China Airlines Flight 008 emergency landing in Alaska happened in a good time in history. It was right when all this information about the flat Earth was being released. I learned later that the Taiwanese mother was doing fine, the baby gained its US citizenship, the doctor was at the right place at the right time, the pilot made the correct decision for the health of the baby, and the mother, the passengers, didn't complain and even clapped when they heard the baby crying. Let's now take a look at another emergency landing with another baby born during the flight, making the pilot land the plane where, well, let's just say that he landed the plane where it was not supposed to land if the Earth were a globe. Chapter 3. Lufthansa Flight LH543. Flight LH543 with 191 passengers aboard and a crew of 13 members departed from Bogota on July 26, 2017 towards Frankfurt, Germany. Lufthansa Flight LH543 is a daily flight from Bogota to Frankfurt which flies at approximately 520 miles per hour at 39,000 feet. The flight takes approximately 11 hours to arrive at its destination, and the distance between Bogota and Frankfurt is 5,650 miles. Among the 191 passengers, a pregnant woman originally from Bulgaria boarded the plane with no major problems. But something quite unusual for the crew of 13 happened during the flight over the Atlantic. Somewhere over the Atlantic, the woman gave birth to a baby boy being assisted by the flight attendants. As it happened to China Airlines Flight 008, LH543 just happened to have not one doctor on board, but 3. Reports say that the passengers had to move seats and the back of the plane was converted into a delivery room. As it happened to China Airlines Flight 008, the captain also decided to make an emergency landing for the well-being of the child. What doesn't make sense is the city where the plane landed. Lufthansa Flight LH543 made an emergency landing in Manchester, England. Let's take a close look at the flight path between Bogota and Frankfurt on the Globe Earth model, demonstrated in image 03 below. According to the flight path in Google Maps, Lufthansa LH543 flies just north of Portugal and Spain. It flies just south of Paris, south of Brussels and above Luxembourg before reaching Frankfurt. Even if the plane had to fly a little bit north of its flight path on the globe, a stopover in London could be somewhat acceptable. But the plane landed in Manchester 200 miles north of London. This makes absolutely no sense at all on the globe Earth model. Manchester is located 694 miles northwest of Frankfurt. The flight is coming from South America, just north of the equator. There is no explanation on a globe Earth why Lufthansa LH543 was flying 700 miles northwest of its destination, 200 miles north of the city of London. When looking at the flight path on a flat Earth map, everything becomes clear, everything makes sense. I want you, the reader, to compare Lufthansa LH543 flight path on the globe Earth model and on the flat Earth map, and see for yourself how everything makes more sense on a flat Earth map. As you see in image 04 on the previous page, Manchester is situated directly on the path of Lufthansa flight LH543. Just as it happened to China Airlines Flight 008 when the pilot was flying the aircraft directly above Alaska, the same thing happened to Lufthansa flight LH543. Manchester in England is located directly on the path of this flight that connects Bogota to Frankfurt. In order to reinforce and brainwash the population into believing in a globe Earth model, the media keeps repeating words like flight diverted in order to make the masses believe that the Earth is a spinning sphere shooting through space. The fact of the matter is that the Earth is a plane and doesn't spin and doesn't circle around the Sun. Flight paths prove a flat, non-rotating Earth, and emergency landings seal the deal. The next flight we will be looking at does not involve any airborne babies anymore. No more doctors, baby crying, passengers clapping, and flight attendants performing the duties of nurses. However, its flight path resembles that of China Airlines Flight 008. Let's go to Hong Kong and take Cathay Pacific Flight CX884 and make an emergency landing in Alaska again. Chapter 4 Cathay Pacific Flight CX884 July 29, 2015. Cathay Pacific Flight CX884 is flying from Hong Kong to Los Angeles and everything seems to be fine, until the moment some passengers notice the flight attendants running back and forth down the aisles with uneasy looks on their faces. Cathay Pacific is a daily flight from Hong Kong to Los Angeles. According to the Flight Stats website, the flight time is 13 hours and 40 minutes. It departs Hong Kong at about 1:05 p.m. and arrives in Los Angeles at about 11:35 a.m. PDT. The aircraft type is Boeing 777-300ER. British tourist Ethan Williams grabbed his phone and started documenting everything. "I'm not sure what's happening, but there is something going on this flight," says Williams in his video uploaded to his YouTube channel. As it happened to China Airlines Flight 008, this flight is also supposed to be flying over the Pacific Ocean, but again this emergency landing takes place in the Aleutian Islands, Alaska, where the plane landed safely at Shemya Military Airport. The globe model shows us Hawaii standing in between the west coast of the US and Asia, as image 01 below from a Sea Cruise website illustrates, and as we watched on the seat back screen of a San Francisco to Tokyo flight as demonstrated in image 02 on the next page, we will compare Cathay Pacific Flight CX884 on both the globe model and the Gleason's Flat Earth map. As seen on the previous pages, this emergency landing makes more sense when we locate the cities and the flight path on the Gleason's Flat Earth map. It's a straight path flying from Hong Kong to Los Angeles, having the Aleutian Islands and Alaska right on the way of the flight. If they were really flying over the Pacific Ocean, as the globe model suggests, it would have taken hours for them to divert and reach the remote region in Alaska. As they were preparing for water ditching by asking passengers to put on their life-saving vests, the natural conclusion is that the flight had just left Russian airspace and was about to enter US airspace over the Bering Sea when the decision to land on the island was made by the captain. Image 04 above shows the supposed route of a flight going from San Francisco to Tokyo on a globe Earth. Next to it, as shown on the Gleason's Flat Earth map, is the Bering Sea separating Russian and US airspace. The red line shows the path of Cathay Pacific Flight CX-884. The facts about this emergency landing, which took place on July 29, 2015, did not end there. In July of 2018, the captain of that flight came forward and sued Cathay Pacific for injuries related to the incident. Annabelle Cochrane Lawrenson, who joined the company in 1998 and became the company's first captain in 2007, according to South China Morning Post, accused the company of negligence and breach of duty. When it was announced they were going to land in Alaska, Williams added this on his video. "That's really good news, but we still don't know why. It doesn't really matter as long as we land okay."
I will speak to you once we're on the ground at Shemya, and we can expect to land just over here. Thank you.
So that's really good news, guys. We're diverting to Shemya, and it's going to be a normal landing, not a water landing. So that's really good news, but still don't know why, but it doesn't really matter, I suppose, as long as we land okay. We're going to be landing in 10 minutes.
I hope now he understands that this landing in Alaska makes more sense when looking at the Flat Earth map. Chapter 5 Qatar Airways Flight QR725. A teenager from Saudi Arabia fell in coma aboard Qatar Airways Flight QR725, which departed from Chicago towards Doha, Qatar. The online news website Express UK reported that a teenager from Saudi Arabia on board flight QR725 had a toxic shock syndrome and hyperthermia. After the teenager fell into a coma, the captain decided to make an emergency landing. Where the plane landed is where the argument Flat Earth versus Globe Earth started. The plane landed in Moscow. Look at image 01 and 02. As we can see from these images, according to the globe model and Google Maps, this flight should start flying southeast towards the Middle East, flying directly above Portugal and Spain and over the Mediterranean Sea. It should then fly over Israel, Jordan and Saudi Arabia and finally reach Qatar. Chicago is located at 41.8781 degrees north and Doha is located at 25.2854 degrees north. The flight path on Google Maps would be correct if Earth were a globe because it shows the flight descending the parallels from 41.8781 degrees north until reaching 25.2854 degrees north, which is where Doha is located. Instead, this flight landed in Moscow, which is located at 55.7558 degrees north. In other words, on the globe model, this flight would have to fly up with its nose pointing up and then fly down. It doesn't really make any sense at all. However, when plotted on the Flat Earth map, this flight makes perfect sense as the Flat Earth map shows that Moscow is located directly between Chicago and Doha, as seen on image 01 and 02. Whether it is on the Gleason's map or on the azimuthal equidistant map, when the cities where these flights departed from and their destinations and the cities where their emergency landings took place are all located and their flight paths drawn, the reader will have no other conclusion but to realize that the Earth is not a globe. The Flat Earth map is not stamped on the UN flag for some decorative reason. The leaders of this world know that the Earth is in fact flat. Chapter 6 Air France Flight AF116. When I heard that Air France Flight AF116 had landed in Irkutsk, Siberia, I immediately thought about passengers being sent to forced labor camps, momentarily forgetting that the Soviet Union no longer exists. But it didn't mean that the passengers had any freedom while they waited for a replacement plane. News channels broadcasted images of passengers being kept at the airport and watched by heavily armed officers since they had no visas. To make things worse, the replacement aircraft also had problems, so the passengers had to stay stranded at the airport for almost 3 days. Time magazine online edition headlines: Air France passengers stranded in Siberia for 3 days after 2 planes malfunctioned. Air France flight AF116 Paris to Shanghai is a daily flight and it takes approximately 11 hours and 20 minutes of flying to cover a distance calculated at being about 5,800 miles. Let's compare Air France AF116 flight path on both the globe model and on the flat earth model, where the reader will see that this emergency stop in Irkutsk, Siberia makes no sense on the globe. However, it makes perfect sense on a flat earth. It's said that the picture tells 1,000 stories, so let images 01 and 02 speak to you. As the reader can see, the path of flight Air France AF116 makes more sense on the Gleason's flat earth map when comparing it to the globe earth model. The same thing can be said when comparing this flight path on both the Mercator projection and the Gleason's flat earth map as seen on image 02. This emergency landing in Irkutsk, Siberia only makes sense on the Gleason's flat earth map. As the reader can see on the Gleason's flat earth map, the blue line connects Paris to Shanghai over Siberia, having the city of Irkutsk on the flight path. The flat earth map demonstrates in a convincing way that the Earth is flat and that Air France flight AF116 was flying right along the route as drawn on the Gleason's flat earth map. On the other hand, when we look at the globe model and the flight path as shown by Google Maps, we will find that the plane was not flying along the route as described on the globe. According to the globe model, this flight should fly just north of Vienna in Austria and then on across Ukraine, South Kazakhstan, and then over China's northwest territory until it arrives in Shanghai. The reader must also consider the fact that on the globe model, Air France AF116 flies south of Moscow, whereas on the flat earth model this flight path goes north of Moscow. Irkutsk is located close to the border of Siberia and Mongolia. If Air France flight AF116 were flying on a globe, this emergency landing would have taken place somewhere northwest of China towards southeast China. The fact that Air France flight AF116 landed in Irkutsk in Siberia is enough proof that the shape of the Earth is not spherical. Times and times again, when we compare flight paths on the globe and then on the flat Earth map, the flat Earth model proves to be correct and the globe model proves to be wrong. Chapter 7 Emirates Flight EK225. Emirates Flight EK225 is a daily and direct flight from San Francisco to Dubai. The aircraft that flies this route is the modern Airbus 380, and the flight time between these two cities is about 15 hours and 50 minutes, being one of the longest flights executed by Emirates. On November 20th, 2016, Emirates flight EK225 had to make an emergency landing due to the fact that someone fell sick during the flight. Russian news agency TASS reported in its website that the plane landed at Moscow's Domodedovo at 4:33 Moscow time as a 70-year-old passenger, an Indian national, fell sick. She will be taken to hospital, the source said. Image 01 on the next page will present to the reader the route of this flight on a globe going on an easterly direction, crossing the United States as it descends latitude lines, crossing the Atlantic Ocean, on to fly over Portugal and Spain. As shown on Google Maps, EK225 keeps on flying over the Mediterranean Sea and then over Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia until it reaches Dubai. If this flight flew on a western direction, it would fly over the Pacific Ocean, on over Japan, Korea, China and Pakistan, and then arrive in Dubai. Instead of making an emergency landing in one of the countries listed when flying in a western direction, or in one of the countries listed when flying in an eastern direction on a globe, Emirates flight EK225 made an emergency landing in Moscow, Russia. How could that be possible if the Earth is supposed to be a sphere and Google Maps presents us with the exact flight route going eastward? When the reader compares the flight path on both the Gleason's map and on the globe in Google Maps, he will see that the Gleason's map route makes more sense, showing a straight line going from San Francisco to Dubai, flying over Canada and then over Russia, making Moscow one of the best options for an emergency landing. Globe believers may argue that Google Maps does not show the shortest route on the globe, but how can it be if Google Maps not only shows the flight path but also calculates the flight time as being 15 hours and 50 minutes? If Google Maps is presenting us the correct flight time as being 15 hours and 50 minutes, by showing an eastward direction of the flight going over the Atlantic and then southern Europe and then over the Mediterranean towards the Middle East until it reaches Dubai, why would globe believers argue that I should use Google Satellite instead if the flight time calculated on Google Maps and Google Satellite is the same? If the flight time is the same, then why argue by saying Google Maps does not show the shortest route on the globe? The fact is, Google Maps does its best to demonstrate the flight path and calculate the flight time on a globe. The problem is, since the Earth is not a globe, Google Maps flight paths do not match reality. This problem is not only found in Google Maps. In fact, all flight tracker websites are connected with one master program which is created by NASA. This program converts flat Earth data into globe Earth data to fit the heliocentric model. Chapter 8 PIA Flight PK785 Pakistan International Airlines Flight PK785 took off from Benazir Bhutto International Airport on March 15, 2015. During the flight, a passenger complained of chest pains and the captain made the immediate decision to land the aircraft. The plane landed in Moscow. When I first talked about this flight in my video 6 emergency landings that prove the Earth is flat, I drew the lines on the globe just like the red dotted lines on the map below in image 01. The screenshot of PK785 flight path captured from flightradar24.com shows a similar route to the lines I had drawn in that video. The pilot should have made an emergency stop in Poland or even Germany or in western Ukraine. Instead, the plane landed in Moscow where the passenger received medical attention. It doesn't make much sense on a globe why this plane landed in Moscow, but when the flight path is plotted on a Gleason's flat Earth map, it makes perfect sense, as we will see in image 02 on the next page. As we can see in image 02, The flight path of PIA flight PK785 shown on Google Maps is very similar to the flight path demonstrated in the screenshot taken from Flight Radar 24 and on the Mercator projection. In both images, we see the flight path as going over Poland and over Germany. Islamabad, the city where the plane took off, is situated at 33.6844 degrees north, while London, the final destination for flight PK785, is situated at 51.5074 degrees north. We clearly see that this flight path on the globe makes no sense at all. But when the line is drawn over the Gleason's flat Earth map, it makes perfect sense why PIA flight PK785 landed in Moscow. Moscow is situated on the flight path when flying from London to Islamabad, just as demonstrated on the flat Earth map. This was not a unique situation. In fact, in 2013, another passenger fell ill during flight PIA flight PK785 Islamabad to London, and the same thing happened. The captain made an emergency landing in Moscow. Unfortunately, that passenger died of a heart attack when that happened in 2013. In 2016, flight PK758 once again made an emergency landing in Moscow. Only this time around, it was due to technical and mechanical reasons. These three emergency landings in 2013, 2015 and 2016 in Moscow by Pakistan International Airlines PK785 demonstrate that these planes are not being diverted from hundreds of miles from their flight path to Moscow. They demonstrate that Moscow is on their flight path, that these flight paths go straight from Islamabad to London, and that the Earth is not a globe. Chapter 9. Lufthansa Flight LH727. Lufthansa Flight LH727 emergency landing involved a little girl who died on a flight from Shanghai in China to Munich in Germany. The aircraft landed in Yemelyanov in Russia. LH727 is a daily flight connecting Shanghai to Munich. The distance between the two cities is approximately 5,500 miles. The flight speed averages 470 miles per hour, and it takes about 12 hours and 5 minutes for the Airbus A340-600 to fly from Shanghai to Munich. As the reader can see on the following page, this flight from Shanghai to Munich should follow a similar path as the flight Shanghai to Paris, flying towards the northwest of China, on over Kazakhstan, then the southernmost part of Russia into Ukraine and over Slovakia and Austria, and then arrive in Munich in Germany. Munich stands at 48.1351 degrees north, while Shanghai stands at 31.2304 degrees north. Google Maps shows how exactly this flight path should be on the globe model. Instead, we see this emergency landing taking place again in Yemelyanov, Russia, at 56.1721 degrees north. It does not make any sense on the globe why an airplane flying from a lower latitude coordinate would fly all the way up to a higher line of latitude and then fly down to its destination at a lower line of latitude. Google Maps does just that when plotting these two cities on a globe, giving us the exact flight time and the route this plane should follow. When we plot all this information on Gleason's flat Earth map, we will see that landing in Yemelyanov not only makes more sense on the flat Earth map, but also explains why it landed there, since 90% of the flight path is above Chinese territory and over Russian territory. Let's now compare this flight on the globe and on the flat Earth map and get to the most reasonable conclusion. As we see on the Gleason's flat Earth map, just after crossing the border between China and Russia, the captain landed the plane in the city of Yemelyanov in Russia. The flat Earth map shows exactly why Lufthansa LH727 made a stop in this town. It's located exactly on the flight path between Shanghai and Munich. Let's move on with our comparisons and examine another emergency landing, this time in North America. Chapter 10. American Airlines Flight AA263. Once again, a medical situation during a flight caused an emergency landing, only this time being in Canada during a flight from Dallas to Beijing. It was initially announced that the aircraft was going to land in Edmonton, Canada, but due to some problems with the aircraft, the pilot had to divert and fly towards Calgary, where the runway is longer and more resources to a possible rough aircraft landing were available. According to the website heavy.com, AA263, due to issues with plane flaps, the flight has diverted to Calgary for a longer runway and has dumped fuel along the way to lighten the plane before its landing. It was a tense flight, but thanks to a calm pilot, crew, and flight control, the plane landed safely. Heavy.com was reporting live as the situation with the flight was developing. This emergency landing took place on October 11, 2018. Details about this flight are as follows. Boeing 787-8, distance 6,965 miles, speed 568 miles per hour. Flight time is 14 hours and 5 minutes. As it happens to flight going towards Asia from North America, one may think this flight goes west over California and then over the Pacific Ocean towards China. Dallas being situated at 32.7767 degrees north and Beijing being situated at 39.9042 degrees north, it only makes sense to think this flight goes west and gradually reaches Beijing's coordinates as it flies towards China. Not only the majority of people think that this should be the correct path, but also Google Maps thinks like that too, because when using Google Maps to plot a flight path between these two cities, that's what the result shows. The fact that this flight and all other flights going towards Asia from North America, even if a flight from North America departs from as far as south as San Diego, military flights from San Diego towards military bases in Japan and South Korea, they all fly over Canada and or Alaska despite seats back screen showing them going over the ocean. Let's now compare AA263 on the globe model and on the flat Earth map. As it can be seen, AA263 is demonstrated on the globe as flying west over California and then over the Pacific Ocean towards China as the flight gradually goes from Dallas at 32.7767 degrees north to Beijing at 39.9042 degrees north. Instead of flying this route, American Airlines flight AA263 flies straight north over Canada, Russia, and on to China as demonstrated on the Gleason's Flat Earth map. One more time, we have evidence that the Flat Earth map is correct when plotting flight routes. One more time, we see the city where an emergency landing took place being on the path of the flight according to the Flat Earth map. Chapter 11. Korean Flight KE38. The Aviation Herald published on its website avherald.com on Tuesday, July 2nd, 2013, the following. A Korean Air Boeing 777-300 registration HL8275 performing flight KE38 departed July 1st from Chicago, Illinois to Seoul, South Korea with 273 people on board, was en route at FL 340 about 300 nautical miles south of Anadyrh, Russia, when the crew needed to shut the left-hand engine GE90 down. The crew drifted the aircraft down to FL-270, turned north, and diverted to another dumping fuel. The aircraft landed safely on runway 19 about 1 hour later. There are no secrets, as we have learned up to this chapter, that all these flights coming from Asia to North America fly over Russia and Alaska. This is not the only incident involving Korean Airlines. There are a couple more that won't be listed in this book. In 2001, a Korean Airlines en route to New York was told to land immediately in Alaska. After typing the wrong codes, the plane was prohibited from landing in Alaska and had to land in the Yukon province in Canada, which neighbors Alaska. Another Korean Airlines landed in Finland after having been shot at by Soviet jets in the time of the Cold War. All of these flights, when plotted on a flat Earth map, demonstrate one thing: they all fly in a straight path from point A to point B. As images 2 and 3 clearly demonstrate, Korean Airlines flight KE-38 from Seoul to Chicago was flying a straight path on a flat surface when the aircraft had to land over Russia. When we plot this flight on the globe model or on the Mercator projection, it makes zero sense. However, when we plot this flight over the Gleason's flat Earth map, it makes complete sense. Anadyr in Russia is located right on the path of this flight from Seoul, Korea to Chicago, United States. As the reader may have figured it out by now, there is a pattern here. Not one flight or two flights fly this route. All of these flights coming from Asia fly on this route despite flight tracking websites showing the contrary. Chapter 12: Swiss International Flight LX040. On February 4, 2017, Swiss International Flight LX040 was forced to make an emergency landing at a remote airport in Canada. The flight was coming from Zurich to Los Angeles when one of its engines stopped working. There are no more than 6,000 inhabitants in the remote town of Iqaluit, Canada, where flight LX040 was forced to land. Here are a few more details about the flight. Boeing 777-300 flying at an altitude of 34,000 feet at a speed of 508 miles per hour. The distance between Zurich and Los Angeles is approximately 5,930 miles and the flight time is 12 hours and 10 minutes. Many people in North America, especially those living on the East Coast, think that if they travel east they will end up in Europe. This is because when looking at the globe model facing east across the Atlantic, you will see Portugal and Spain, but the fact is, when setting sail east from New York on a straight path, the person sailing or flying directly east from New York will end up crossing the equator or arriving in Sierra Leone in West Africa. This is because the Earth is not a globe. It is in fact flat, and when you look at the flat Earth map you will clearly see what I am trying to explain here. Image 03 demonstrates this. As a result, those who are sailing to Europe cannot simply fly east. They have to fly north to northeast, fly over Canada and Greenland to reach Europe. This is due to the fact that the Earth is flat and not a globe. When we compare Swiss flight LX040 on both the globe projection and on the Gleason's flat Earth map, it becomes evident that no flight whatsoever is ever demonstrated to be flying on a globe Earth. See it for yourself. As we see on image 01, this flight path on the globe or any other flight going east or west never fly the routes as projected on Google Maps. They can never do that due to the fact that they are not flying around the globe. If Swiss International Flight LX040 had really been flying over a globe, As it left Zurich to Switzerland, this flight would have flown over France just south of Paris and then on above the Atlantic Ocean. It would have flown over Nova Scotia, then Maine, Vermont, and all other Northeast United States until it reached California. Chances are they wouldn't have made it safely, as the problem would have happened when they were crossing over the Atlantic. But because Earth is not a globe, they were flying a different path over Canada and were able to land safely at Iqaluit Airport. Some people may say that this is a flight from Zurich towards the west coast of the United States and that this flight has to fly over Canada. But why fly above Greenland? To demonstrate that not only flights coming from Europe to the west coast of the United States or going to Europe from the west coast of the United States fly over Canada, I show you here that flights as far east as from New York to France also fly over Canada. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh flew from New York to Paris. Let's compare his flight route and let's look at the true directions east and northeast as shown in image 03. In order to truly reach Europe, one has to fly northeast. Lindbergh's flight over Canada is not a great circle route as some may claim. It's the only route possible since the Earth is not a globe. If Earth were truly a globe, anyone flying from New York towards the east would be able to reach Europe. Lindbergh's flight from New York to Paris wasn't anything out of the normal and neither was a great circle route. It's the only way to fly straight from New York to Paris. The shortest distance between New York and Paris is a straight line over the flat Earth and not a curved line over an imaginary globe Earth. In image 03, I demonstrate first what I was saying at the beginning of the chapter, that setting sail or flying east from New York, one will end up crossing the equator and reaching the west coast of Africa. I have placed a compass directly over New York 75 degrees west parallel and followed the arrow on the compass pointing east and the one pointing northeast. Lindbergh wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary when he flew from New York to Paris as far as a flight route. He wasn't flying any great circle route. This is the only way he could have done it, because if he had flown east from New York, he would have ended up in Africa. Swiss International Flight LX040 stopped in Iqaluit, Canada, demonstrated once more and in a convincing way that airplanes do not fly over a globe. Chapter 13. China Airlines Flight 006. There are conflicting reports on what caused the fourth engine of the Boeing 747 SP, carrying 251 passengers and a crew of 23, flying at 41,000 feet from Taipei towards Los Angeles, to shut off at just 350 miles from reaching the coast of California. Some reports say Captain Min Yuan Ho encountered some heavy turbulence, while other reports say that the plane flew through some volcanic ashes which caused the fourth engine to shut off. The problem with the volcanic ashes theory is that there are no volcanoes over the Pacific Ocean. But what if they were flying over volcanic regions instead of flying over the Pacific, as we are led to believe to be the case? A few TV shows about this incident were made, where they interviewed crew members, passengers, air control agents, and experts in the field of air crash investigation. The reenactment of the event and computer animation made to demonstrate the path of this flight and the struggle of Captain Min Yuan Ho to regain control is what caught my attention. On the TV documentary, the airplane is shown to be approaching Los Angeles coming from the west over the Pacific Ocean. Let's first compare the flight path on both the globe as shown in the reenactment and on the Gleason's flat Earth map on image 01. When looking at the globe projection and the flight path of China Airlines Flight 006 as demonstrated on Google Maps on image 01, we see this flight as coming from the west towards Los Angeles over the Pacific Ocean. The made-for-TV reenactment documentary, where they interviewed some of the crew members, passengers and experts in the aviation field, shows China Airlines Flight 006 approaching the coast of California exactly as demonstrated on Google Maps. The problem is that this plane landed in San Francisco, which is located 380 miles north of Los Angeles. It doesn't make much sense if the plane was approaching Los Angeles to head northeast towards San Francisco for an emergency landing. Reports say that the airplane was also running out of fuel. If this plane was truly flying over a globe and coming from the west as shown on Google Maps, the correct decision would be to just keep on flying straight towards Los Angeles and land safely there. Instead, they landed in San Francisco. Below, superimposed over the flat Earth map, is a screenshot from the investigative report showing the plane approaching California from the west. I have added the compass and the two red arrows showing the path of the plane according to what was shown. On the flat Earth map, I showed the true direction that this flight was coming from as demonstrated with the compass placed on the 120 degrees west parallel and the arrow pointing northwest. According to what was demonstrated on the TV documentary and demonstrated in this chapter on image 02, the plane approached Los Angeles from the west coming from over the Pacific Ocean. There are reports saying that the plane was running out of fuel due to the problems it had during the flight, therefore it had to land quickly. On the globe, it would have been easier just to keep on flying straight until LAX was reached. Instead, the plane landed in San Francisco, 380 miles north of Los Angeles. How could that be? When looking at the Gleason-Slater map on image 01, we can clearly see the path of this flight as coming from the northwest of California, approaching first San Francisco and then Los Angeles. This is also supported by the official report from the National Transportation Safety Board, which stated that the airplane was approaching California from the northwest. The path on the Gleason's map is correct according to the reports, but on the globe it is found to be wrong. Although the official report clearly states that this plane was coming from the northwest in order to maintain the constant programming and projection of the globe model theory, images of the flight coming from the west from over the Pacific Ocean persist. It would be truer to the story if they had demonstrated on the reenactment show the path of this flight on the flat Earth map as it truly happened. Chapter 14 Qantas Flight QF64. Qantas Flight QF64 is a daily flight from Johannesburg in South Africa to Sydney, Australia. The aircraft type is Boeing 747-400, which flies at 33,000 feet. The speed, 570 miles per hour, will be discussed ahead in this chapter. Not many people know that there are jet streams circling around the Earth with speeds that reach up to 250 miles per hour. There are polar jet streams and subtropical jet streams. Pilots know about them and they fly on these jet streams. They add to the speed of the aircraft without causing any damage to the fuselage. Qantas Flight AF64 flies along the South Circle above what the Gleason's map calls South Ocean towards Australia. The return flight flies with the jet stream as well, going in the opposite direction. Looking at the illustration below, it is not difficult to see why the pilot made an emergency landing in Perth. It's right along the flight path from Johannesburg in South Africa to Sydney, Australia, flying along the jet stream. As I said in the beginning, let's now discuss the speed of Qantas Flight QF64. The speed of this aircraft during this flight is said to be about 560 miles per hour. Let's say that this is to be the case. When adding another 250 miles per hour speed from the jet stream, the final speed equals to 810 miles per hour. This estimate is based assuming this aircraft during this flight flies at only 560 miles per hour. The website flugzeuginfo.net from Germany states that this type of aircraft flies at 583 kts, which equals 610 miles per hour. When flying along the jet stream, the final speed equals to 860 miles per hour without adding any friction to the fuselage due to the fact that the aircraft is flying with the jet stream and not against it. Speed of this type is not uncommon in commercial aviation. Let's look at a few flights with speed of around 800 miles per hour, not reported on the news. Here is a screenshot from Flight Radar 24 showing JetBlue flight B61198 going from Orlando to New York with a speed of 778 miles per hour or 1,252 kilometers per hour, considering this is a US domestic flight. Here is another screenshot from Flight Radar 24 showing Egypt Air MS648 going at a speed of 803 miles per hour or 1,293 kilometers per hour. This Boeing 787-9 flies from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia to Cairo in Egypt. These two examples above didn't make it to the news as being extraordinarily fast due to the jet streams, and I'm not sure why. Some airplanes fly at a higher speed than we are aware of or being acknowledged to, and I believe this is due to the case with the flights mentioned above. On the following page, we will look at 4 speedy flights which made it to the news as being something out of the normal. The flights discussed ahead reached extraordinary speed due to the fact that they flew along the jet stream. Entire segments in news channels were dedicated to propagate this, quote, groundbreaking news as if it were something never heard before. The following flights made it to the news when they flew from Europe to North America at a speed of around 800 miles per hour. Norwegian flight DY7014 New York to London twice in 2018. British Airways flight BA114 New York to London in 2015, and the most recent in February of 2019 reaching 801 miles per hour Virgin Atlantic flight VS8 from Los Angeles to London. During an interview in which Captain Marcelo R. invited an amateur reporter to the cockpit during a flight from Sydney to Buenos Aires, the captain said that the flight from Buenos Aires to Sydney can take up to 16 hours and 45 minutes of flying time, and that's adding to the fact they fly with the jet stream. The captain shows the map with the wind currents on it and a straight path not curving on a supposed great circle route connecting Sydney to Santiago. Pictured here is Captain Marcelo R. showing a straight line on a supposed projection of the globe Earth along Antarctica. The great circle curved line is nowhere to be found. The flight time between Johannesburg, South Africa to Perth in Australia is calculated to be 10 hours and 45 minutes. We have seen that all flights, when flying with the jet stream, gain another 250 miles per hour of extra speed on top of the speed the airplane is already flying, without adding any friction to the fuselage or danger to the passengers. The distance between Perth, Australia and Johannesburg in South Africa, according to the globe model, is calculated as being 5,163 miles. The Boeing 747-400, which made an emergency landing in Perth, would have to be flying at only 500 miles per hour to cover this distance in 10 hours and 45 minutes. It cannot be true because if we subtract the extra 250 miles per hour speed of the jet stream, Qantas flight QF64 would have to be flying at only 250 miles per hour. When we add the extra speed of the jet stream to at least a speed of 550 miles per hour, the Boeing 747-400 flies, the aircraft would have to fly at least at 800 miles per hour. Flying at 800 miles per hour for 10 hours and 45 minutes equals to a distance of 8,360 miles. 800 miles per hour times 10 hours and 45 minutes equals 8,360 miles. 8,360 miles minus 5,163 miles equals a difference of 3,197 miles.